Hi, welcome to Gamers Chess Club online chess lessons. My name is Jason, and this is the fifth lesson in the Introduction to Chess series. Gamers Chess Club is a recreational chess club out of Conroe, Texas, focused on introducing chess to families in a fun and friendly environment. For more information, you can email us at gamerschessclub@gmail.com or visit the Facebook page at www.facebook.com/gamerschessclub. Today's learning objective involves a follow-up from lesson IC02 when I covered how the pieces moved. I mentioned in that lesson that there was a special move called castling that involved the king and the rook. So today's objective is to learn to castle. Okay, so once per game, each player is allowed a special move that involves moving two pieces in one turn, the king and the rook. The king moves two spaces towards the rook, and the rook comes around the king and occupies the square right next to it. So the king, again, moves two spaces, and the rook comes just right around it. And this is done in one move. It's not two moves. This can be done with the rook on the queen side or the king side. When we say queen side, if this chessboard involved all the pieces here, the queen would be here. The queen side is files A through D, and the king side is considered files E through H. So this is the king side of the board and the queen side of the board. So again, with the rules we just talked about, the king would move two spaces. So in a king side castle, the king moves over to the G square and the rook comes just on the other side. And so this is the end result of a king side castle. For queenside castling, again, the king starts on the E square, moves over two spaces, and the rook comes on the other side. This is the queenside castle. So you'll notice the difference between these two castling maneuvers is that when you kingside castle, your king ends up a little safer in the corner than when you queenside castle. You're still not quite as far over as you are on the kingside castle. We'll start by going over some castling rules. First of all, you can't castle if the king or the rook has already moved during the game, so it has to be the first move for both pieces. You also can't castle if the king is in check or would pass through check. We haven't talked about what check means yet. That's coming in a lesson shortly. Check means, think of it as the king being in danger. So it means if the king is currently being attacked by a piece, it can't castle. Or if it's going to pass through a square that is being attacked by a piece, it can't castle. The next rule is you can't castle if the king would be in check at the end of the move. So obviously you can't move the king into danger, just like we learned early on. And then last of all, you can't castle if there's a piece in the way. So there has to be no pieces between your king and your rook. So now I'd like to demonstrate the rules that we just covered. The first one we talked about was that you can't castle if the king or the rook has already moved during the game. So in this first scenario, we know the king starts on the E square. We know the rooks start on the corners. So in this scenario, both rooks have already moved. So they're not on their home square. So in this scenario, the king would not be able to castle. In this scenario, the king has moved. The king is not on his home square, so he would not be able to castle. So an important thing to note is even if the king moves, let's say the king moved here and moves back to E, he still can't castle because it's not his first time to move. Even though he goes back to his home square, he still can't castle because he's moved before. The next rule we talked about was that you can't castle if the king is in check or would pass through check. And we talked about check meaning in danger. So here the king is in danger by the bishop. We know the bishop moves diagonally. So the bishop is currently attacking the king. So the king can move, and he has to move to get out of check, but he can't castle. So he can't go this direction or that direction. Because he's in danger, he can't castle to get out of danger. And this last scenario is if he castled either way, if he castled here over towards the rook, he would have to pass through this square that's being attacked by the bishop, or if he goes this direction to queenside castle, he would have to pass through the D1 square here that's being attacked by the same bishop. And here you can't castle if there's a piece in the way. So here the pieces haven't been developed yet. The bishop is still in the home square, the knight is still in the home square here. the king and rook are not prepared to castle in this situation because there's pieces in the way. So now it's time to practice castling. I want you to set your board up like this and just practice castling. You can do this with a partner if you like to. Just practice moving the king 2 spaces and moving the rook on the other side. And you should practice castling both on the king side and the queen side. So you want to take the white king, move it over 2 squares, rook on the other side. Or if you want a queen side castle, 2 squares, so the king goes to c1 and the rook goes to d1. All right, so I want to ask some questions here. In this scenario, can the white king castle? Let's think about some of our rules. So pause the video, think about the rules we just learned about castling, think about how the pieces move. In particular, think about how the knight moves in this situation, and see if you can answer the question of whether the king can castle here. All right, the answer is that he cannot castle because he's in check. Remember, one of our rules said that if the king is in danger or in check, he can't castle to get out of check. So he would not be able to castle in this situation. Here's another situation. The question is, can the white king castle here? So if it were white's turn, could white castle? So pause the video, think about the rules, think about how all the pieces that are on the board move, and decide whether or not you think the king could castle. Okay, the answer is that he cannot because he would pass through check. So in this situation, the rook is attacking the f1 square. And so if the king were to castle by moving 2 spaces over to the right with the rook coming on the other side, he would have to pass through check, which we know is not allowed. Okay, now here, can the white king castle kingside or queenside? So pause your video, think about our rules, think about how all these pieces move, and let's see if the king can castle kingside or queenside. Okay, so in this situation, the king can only castle queenside, or sometimes it's called castling long. If he tries to castle on the king side, that's here on the files E through H, he would have to pass through a square that's being attacked by the knight. So we know that's not allowed. He's not currently in danger though, so he's not in check. So he could castle queenside. He could come over here to the C1 square with the rook coming to the D1 square, as long as it's the first time for both of those pieces to move. Okay, thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed learning to castle. The next lesson, lesson IC06, is going to cover the other special move we talked about, the en passant. See you there.